You know the story. Moses is in exile in the land of the Midianites. God appears to him as a bush on fire. God tells him, pack his bags and trip on back to Egypt. One little question. Why did he have to take off his shoes? Seriously, think about it. Why does an infinite God care whether or not Moses takes off his sandals? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give you enough credit to say that you understand that God is establishing the concept of a sacred space. But still, why? Why do we need a sacred space? What would happen to a world that totally erased the boundary line between the sacred and the secular? We may as well find out, because that is exactly what is taking place all around us right now. My co-author and I just got back from SoonerCon in Norman, Oklahoma. Had a blast. Lots of college students at this one cosplaying. The Deadpools were great, but the guy who turned his wheelchair into a TIE fighter was my favorite. Met all sorts of interesting folks. One of them was a drag queen in cosplay, calling himself Busty Springfield. Now, you may think that Busty's about to be the bad guy in this story, but no, I assure you, Busty turned out to be very kind, gracious, and there for the same reason that almost everybody else was there. Almost everyone. You see, a big group of us were talking over coffee, and Busty made some comment about Pride Month. One of the others, true story, found his comments offensive. You see, he didn't go far enough for her tastes. She was an ally, she proudly announced, and she believed that every month should be Pride Month. And she actually wound up scolding Busty over this. Some ally. Why do I tell this story? Now, certainly I don't care if a fleet of Karens turned Pride Month into Pride Eternity, and hey, kudos to old Busty for recognizing that if you break down the distinction between the sacred and everything else, that you're going to lose one of those two. I could have told you that when I was a child. It's the one that is disappearing that is the surprise. You see, I've been active in apologetics most of my life, and let me tell you, this was one of the big promises of the atheist argument, of the skeptic community. Lose religion and you would break the spell, as Daniel Dennett put it. Sam Harris's The End of Faith, lots of atheist works harped on this, and much of their basic arguments begin to fall apart unless this theory is correct. And what is the theory? The theory is that if you strip away religion, if you strip away the concept of a personal God, a God who cares where and when you do things like take off your sandals, then everything would become secular. They could not have been more wrong. No, as we lose our collective religion, just the opposite effect is taking place. Everything is becoming sacred. So, what does that mean? What's the difference? The definitions of common for secular and that which is set apart for sacred, or even the more generic of not religious and religious, don't really do much for us. Think of it this way. Secular is anything that can be solved using math. What's the best way to feed a city? What's the best way to build a road? What's the best way to go to the moon? Can you turn it into arithmetic? Then it's secular. It's a part of the secular world. On the other hand, we've come to associate sacred with sacred spaces because that's what we see. But of course it means much more than that. Anything that cannot be defined by material integers, by math, anything that can only be quantified by understanding the metaphysical world is something that we might call sacred. And so, in the Christian metaphysical scheme, we call prayer sacred, we call marriage sacred, we call human life sacred, and we say that these things have value that cannot be measured with mere numbers. But most other things can. Medicine, engineering, food production. Observe, collect data, crunch the numbers, look for a better way. Christian societies outpaced, outproduced, outcompeted societies all around the world that were attaching metaphysical significance to everything. And so, doing things like planting the seeds from all of their grain crops, not just the largest ones, which is what gives you more yield per acre, and how things like wheat became a crop, not just another grass. These are the things that built our world. But the argument was always, wouldn't it be even better if we got rid of the things that were attaching metaphysical significance? Couldn't absolutely everything be better guided by pure math, by a materialistic worldview unencumbered by those pesky religious ideals? And now we know the answer. Now we've seen it with our own eyes. When you erase the boundary between the sacred and the secular, yes, one of them vanishes. But it isn't the sacred. No, it is the secular that vanishes. Our human need for meaning drives us. Our instinctual knowledge that we are spirit, that there is a metaphysical reality, takes over. And everything in our lives winds up becoming sacred. COVID, for example. From the material, the mathematical standpoint, the questions were all pretty simple. What age demographics were affected? To what extent? At that point, there was plenty of case law to guide government agencies on what, if any, liberties could and should be suspended. There would have been some. Certainly, until the vaccine could be rolled out, it could all have gone fairly smoothly. Except no, not anymore. In the world where the line between the sacred and the secular has vanished, anything that hits the public eye immediately turns into a moral litmus test. In this case, it was all about those vaccines. Gotta get the jab. Healthy 25-year-old? Get every vaccine or else you're a bad person. Yeah, we did kind of rush through the safety checks, and now some of those healthy people are dropping dead. Oopsie. The border, education, electric vehicles, name anything that hits the news cycle and is getting the sacred treatment. Of course, the one that dominates these days is the presidential race. And unless something else gets us first, this will almost certainly end the United States as a sovereign 50-state union. Let's be clear on this. Before he became the spawn of Hitler and Satan, Donald Trump was a lifelong Democrat who once stumped for Hillary Clinton during her Senate run. A little over 10 years ago, he developed an interest in running for office. The Democrat field for president was stacked at the time. That was okay. He was never too sticky on the hot-button issues, and besides, the way everything was shifting left, he started to have more in common with the Republicans anyway. He'd never been hard right-wing in his views, however. Doesn't matter. You see, when you moralize something like the political race, it's no fun to imagine you're up against a minor little kind of sort of evil. No. You want to imagine that you're up against the most evil that ever corrupted the face of the earth. The rest is purely a function of Trump's combination of charisma and ego. It'll happen to the next candidate, too. Assuming we make it 4 more years, which right now I'd rate it about 50-50. It'll take time. If it's DeSantis, it won't take time. I expect they'll go right after him day one for human trafficking after all the migrants he shipped around. Somebody else, and they'll work their way up to it. Everything will be blown out of proportion. You'll see. They'll say something like, do you know that J.D. Vance once double-parked his car? Do you know how many people die each year walking through parking lots? J.D. Vance is a murderer. This is the world that has lost its concept of the sacred and of the secular. Why did God tell Moses to take off his sandals? So that he could wear them everywhere else without any crisis of conscience. Or like Busty with some Karen looking down her nose at him. Oh, you take off your sandals in the presence of God? I never wear shoes. I'm always in the presence of God. I'm such a good person. You can tell by my feet. This is David Reichert from The Bunker. Our second book, Fluid Shock, is now available from our publisher or from Amazon. Don't miss the next book in our award-winning pandemic horror series, The Holocaust Engine. Link below.